Binta was just 8 years old when tragedy struck, but before that fateful day, her life was filled with joy, warmth, and the unconditional love of her parents. Her father, a wealthy merchant, had built a vast empire, owning properties in different parts of the world. He was a man of great wisdom, one who understood the uncertainties of life. It was perhaps this foresight that led him to do something extraordinary on Binta's 8th birthday, an action that would hold great significance in the years to come. The celebration was grand, extravagant even, as expected of a man of his status. Guests arrived in elegant attire, well-wishers bearing gifts that sparkled under the golden chandeliers that adorned the hall. The atmosphere was charged with laughter, the air thick with the aroma of exotic delicacies being served on silver platters. Children ran about in sheer excitement, their laughter blending harmoniously with the enchanting melody of the orchestra playing in the background. The hall itself was nothing short of breathtaking, decorated with the finest embellishments money could buy. Binta, the star of the day, was clad in a stunning pink gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. Her eyes gleamed with pure joy as she danced among her friends, her laughter ringing out like the sound of wind chimes in the evening breeze. Her parents watched from a distance, her mother smiling softly while her father bore a look of contemplation, as if lost in deep thought. Then, amidst the celebrations, her father beckoned her over. With a loving yet solemn expression, he handed her a small, sealed parcel. Binta's tiny hands eagerly reached out, her curiosity piqued. She wanted to open it immediately, her youthful excitement pushing her to uncover the mystery of her gift. But before she could tear through the wrapping, her father gently placed his hand over hers, stopping her. "No, my child, you must not open this," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made even the bustling room feel suddenly still. "Instead, you will hand it over to that man in the black suit." Binta frowned, her little face scrunching in confusion. She didn't understand. Why would her father give her a gift only to take it away moments later? Nevertheless, she obeyed, albeit reluctantly, and walked over to the man her father had pointed out. He was tall, with sharp, piercing eyes that held an air of mystery. With a pout, Binta handed the parcel over, her small fingers lingering for a moment before finally letting go. Her father then turned to the man, his voice now serious, filled with an intensity that sent a shiver through the man in the black suit. "I don't know why I am doing this," he admitted, his gaze unwavering. "But I feel that something is not quite right. I don't know what tomorrow holds for me. I don't know what will happen next. But hear me well. Do not open this parcel until Binta turns 20 years old, unless I instruct you to do so before then. However, if something happens to me before that time, if I die, then this parcel must be opened when she reaches 20. The man in the black suit shifted uneasily, swallowing the lump that had suddenly formed in his throat. "God forbid, sir, nothing will happen to you." Binta's father smiled faintly and let out a quiet chuckle. "Tomorrow is pregnant, and we don't know what it will birth for us. We talk about life, but let us never forget that we are not the owners of it. The true owner can decide to take it away at any moment." Just as he was about to say more, his gaze landed on a familiar figure approaching from the distance, his only brother, Bonnie. A sigh of exasperation left his lips. He dismissed the man in the black suit, already knowing trouble was brewing. Bonnie was his only sibling, yet they were as different as night and day. While Binta's father was disciplined, hard-working, and prudent, Bonnie was reckless, extravagant, and consumed by an insatiable thirst for wealth that he neither worked for nor deserved. Despite numerous efforts to help Bonnie and his family, it was never enough. He squandered every opportunity given to him, wasted every dime in pursuit of temporary pleasure. His wife was no different, careless, greedy, and just as indulgent as he was. They lived for the moment, never considering the consequences of their actions. As Bonnie reached him, his posture was stiff with anger. He adjusted his shirt, his jaw clenched in irritation. "You are my only brother. but you treat me as if I am a nobody." He spat, his voice thick with resentment. Binta's father remained calm. "What exactly are you saying, Bonnie?" he asked, though he already knew where this conversation was heading. It was always the same. Bonnie scoffed. "You dare ask me what I'm saying? I came to your house asking for just 10 million naira. Just 10 million, and you refused. You said you didn't have the money. My children were chased out of school because of that. But today, you are celebrating your daughter's birthday with more than that amount. You are wicked, a wicked brother." Binta's father sighed deeply, rubbing his temple. "Bonnie, look at yourself. Are you not ashamed? Are you not ashamed to call yourself a father? How many times have I paid their school fees? More than 3 times in one term. Where does the money go? You squander it all on your reckless lifestyle. What more do you want from me? Should I die for you before you recognize my love for you?" Bonnie sneered. "You should have just given me the money for their fees." His elder brother took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration boiling within him. "Bonnie, give me the contact information for their school. I will pay the fees directly. Or better yet, transfer them to the same school as Binta. That way, I can ensure their education without worrying about what you do with the money." Bonnie's face twisted in anger. "Oh, so that people will know that my brother is the one paying my children's school fees. Or so that Binta can tell her friends how she's the reason my kids are in school. Is that it?" Binta's father exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Bonnie, do you even listen to yourself? Just take a moment and hear your own words. Today is my daughter's birthday. I do not wish to argue with you now. We will talk about this later, at home." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Bonnie fuming. Bonnie clenched his fists, grinding his teeth in anger. He snapped his fingers and muttered under his breath, "We shall see." Then he stormed off toward his wife, his mind clouded with bitterness and dark thoughts. Little did anyone know that the events of that day would mark the beginning of a storm that would change Binta's life forever. After the grand celebration had ended and the last of the guests had departed, Bonnie approached Binta's father, his face stretched into a forced smile. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of roasted delicacies and the faint echoes of laughter, yet beneath it all, an unsettling tension hung between the two brothers. Bonnie's smile did not reach his eyes, and though his lips spoke words of farewell, there was something cold and calculating in his demeanor. "Good night, brother," he said, his voice unnervingly smooth. "I hope you enjoyed the party as much as Binta did." Binta's father observed him for a moment, his sharp gaze searching for the intent behind Bonnie's sudden cordiality. But rather than address it, he simply nodded. "Good night, Bonnie?" Beside him, Binta's mother stood still, her heart constricting with an inexplicable feeling of dread. There was something about Bonnie's smile, something unnatural, something that sent chills racing down her spine. She had always known that Bonnie harbored jealousy toward her husband, but tonight there was a glint in his eyes that unsettled her more than ever before. She wanted to say something, to tell her husband to be careful, to voice the fear clawing at her chest, but she remained silent. It was just a feeling, she told herself, just her mind playing tricks on her. As Bonnie walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the night, Binta's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close as if to shield her from some unseen force. Moments later, Binta and her parents left the venue, their sleek black car gliding through the quiet, moonlit streets. Binta was exhausted, but happy, her little fingers clutching onto her mother's hand as she drifted between wakefulness and sleep in the back seat. Her father, ever the careful driver, navigated the familiar roads with ease, his thoughts preoccupied with the events of the evening. The tension with Bonnie still lingered in his mind, but he shook it off. Tonight was supposed to be about Binta, about celebrating her life and happiness. But fate had other plans. Just as they approached a bend, something went terribly wrong. The car suddenly jerked violently, the engine roaring unnaturally. Binta's father's hands tightened around the steering wheel as he pressed on the brakes, but nothing happened. The brakes, his voice came out in a harsh whisper. Laced with rising panic, he pressed down harder. Still, nothing. The car picked up speed, hurtling forward as if possessed. "Slow down," Binta's mother cried, clutching onto her daughter protectively. "I can't." Her husband's voice was strained with fear. "The brakes, they're not working." Binta stirred, roused by the chaos around her. Her sleepy eyes widened in confusion as she saw the panic-stricken faces of her parents. "Papa," she called, her small voice barely audible over the blaring sound of the speeding vehicle. Binta's mother turned, her hands trembling as she cupped her daughter's face. "Hold on, my love. Hold on tight." The world outside became a blur of flashing streetlights and darkened buildings. The car swerved dangerously, veering off the road, tires screeching against the pavement. And then impact. A deafening crash shattered the night. Glass exploded, metal twisted with an ear-splitting screech, and everything was engulfed in chaos. The force of the collision sent their bodies jerking violently, the air thick with the scent of burning rubber and blood. Then, silence. The world seemed to still, the once lively streets now eerily quiet except for the faint flickering of a damaged street light overhead. Within the wreckage, Binta lay motionless, her small frame nestled in the arms of her mother, who had shielded her in the final moments. Blood painted the seats, the shattered windshield allowing the cold night air to seep in. The sound of sirens pierced through the silence, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the tragic scene. Passers-by had gathered, murmuring in hushed, horrified voices as emergency responders rushed to the mangled vehicle. Binta's parents were unresponsive. Paramedics worked frantically, checking for any signs of life, but it was too late. Binta's father had succumbed to his injuries on impact, his protective instincts unable to save him from the cruel hands of fate. Her mother, who had held onto her child until her very last breath, lay still, her once warm hands now cold and lifeless. Yet, amidst the tragedy, a fragile heartbeat still persisted. Binta was alive. She was rushed to the hospital, her tiny body bruised and battered, but she had survived. The news of their death spread so fast, leaving a dark shadow over the once joyous household. The grand mansion that had echoed with laughter only hours before now stood eerily silent, drowning in the grief of loss. At the funeral, mourners gathered, their faces etched with sorrow as they watched the coffins being lowered into the earth. The weight of finality settled heavily upon the crowd, yet no one bore the burden more than Binta. Dressed in black, her tiny hands clutching a single white flower, she stood before the graves, her young mind unable to fully grasp the depth of what had happened. Her father, who had held her hand and danced with her just days ago. Her mother, whose voice had soothed her to sleep, they were gone forever. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she placed the flower atop the fresh mound of soil, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Mama, Papa." The only relative left to care for her was Bonnie. As the last handfuls of soil were thrown onto the graves, Bonnie stood by, watching with an expression that was difficult to read. He was now her guardian, and with that knowledge, a storm began to brew, one that would shape Binta's life in ways no one could have foreseen. The world as Binta knew it had crumbled the moment she stepped into her uncle's house. What was once a life of love, warmth, and security became one of cruelty, hardship, and pain. She was no longer Binta, the cherished daughter of a wealthy merchant. She had become a nameless shadow in a house that should have been her home. From the very first day, she realized that there was no place for her in her uncle's family except as a servant. If she was not scrubbing the floors until her fingers bled, then she was washing piles of dirty clothes, her small hands raw from the harsh soap. If she was not carrying buckets of water heavier than her frail body could bear, then she was kneeling in the bathroom, scrubbing toilets until her knees ached. Eating became a luxury. The food that had once been served to her on golden plates was now something she could only dream of. Every morning, the aroma of breakfast filled the air as her uncle, his wife, and their children sat at the dining table, laughing and eating lavishly. But Binta, she was left to watch from the corner, her stomach growling in protest. If she dared to ask for food, she was met with mocking laughter. Food? For a maid. Maids don't eat in this house unless they earn it. Her uncle's wife would sneer. Binta quickly learned that asking was useless. If she was lucky, she would get scraps, leftovers thrown onto the floor as if she were an animal. If she was unlucky, she would go to bed hungry, her belly twisting in agony as she clutched herself in the cold darkness of her tiny room. School became a distant memory. While her uncle's children dressed in crisp uniforms and left for school each morning, she was ordered to stay behind and clean the house. Despite the wealth surrounding her, despite the money her father had left behind, she was denied even the most basic right to education. And yet, the greatest cruelty was not the labor or the hunger. It was the way they laughed at her suffering. Her cousins, spoiled and heartless, made a game out of tormenting her. "Look at you," they would jeer, throwing pieces of bread at her feet. "Pick it up, Maid." They would giggle as she hesitated, her pride warring with her hunger. "Your days of eating in a golden plate are over, Binta. Now it's our turn." Each time her uncle celebrated his children's birthdays, the sound of their laughter, the sight of the beautiful cakes and decorations sent a dagger through Binta's heart. She was forced to serve them, bringing out trays of food while they reveled in the same joy she had once known. And each time, as she stood in the shadows, watching the candles being lit, she would remember her own birthday. The last day her parents had been alive, the day she had lost everything. Some nights, she wished that birthday had never happened. She wished her father had never thrown that party, that he had never given her that sealed parcel, that they had simply gone on living as they always had. Maybe, just maybe, her parents would still be alive. One fateful day, hunger clawed at Binta's stomach with such ferocity that she could barely stand. She had not eaten in 3 days. The memory of how she had ended up in this state was still fresh in her mind. She had been cooking for the family when exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she fell asleep. By the time she woke up, the food had burned. Her uncle's wife had been furious, declaring that Binta would not eat for a whole week as punishment. By the 3rd day, Binta was weak. She dragged herself outside to throw out the trash, her limbs trembling from hunger and exhaustion. As she placed the garbage in the roadside bin, a sharp pain twisted in her stomach, making her double over with a soft groan. "What's wrong with you?" The voice startled her. She looked up and saw a boy, about 16 years old, standing before her. His clothes were worn, and he carried a tray filled with bananas and ground nuts as means of survival. "I don't know," Binta gasped, pressing her hands against her stomach. "It hurts, a lot." "Have you eaten today?" he asked. Binta shook her head. "I haven't eaten in 3 days." The boy's eyes widened in shock. "Why?" Because I burned the food I was cooking. My uncle's wife said I wouldn't eat for a week as punishment." "A whole week?" The boy's voice was laced with disbelief. "That's wickedness." Binta smiled faintly, though the pain in her stomach made it difficult. "My uncle is worse than she is," she whispered. The boy sighed and reached into his tray, pulling out a banana and some ground nuts. "Here, eat this." Binta hesitated. "But, no buts. Take it." Tears pricked her eyes as she accepted the food, her fingers trembling. As she bit into the banana, the sweetness exploded on her tongue, a relief so profound that she almost sobbed. The boy sat beside her, watching her eat. "I was an orphan too," he said softly. "I suffered just like you. But one day, I decided to leave. I ran away and started selling in the streets. I sleep in an uncompleted building, but at least I am free." His words ignited something in Binta's heart. That night, she snuck out of her room to ease herself when she overheard her uncle and his wife talking. "I don't know why that girl is still alive," her uncle said. Binta froze. "I told you she's a witch," his wife hissed. "How did she survive the accident if she wasn't one?" "We planned everything perfectly, but instead of all 3 of them dying, she lived." Binta's breath caught in her throat. Her uncle's voice was calm, cold. "I'll make sure she dies in this house. I don't want anyone fighting over this wealth tomorrow." A sickening silence followed. Her uncle's wife chuckled darkly. "Well, your brother was a fool. He never wrote a will, That serves him right. How could he have known that that day would be his last? Her uncle sneered. I was laughing at him the entire time. He refused to give me school fees for my children, and now I've stopped his only child's education. Binta clenched her fists. Now she knew the truth. Her parents had not died in an accident. They had been murdered. The next morning, Binta made up her mind. She would not stay another day in this house. She was 17 now, old enough to leave. Old enough to fight for her life. When she announced her decision, her uncle's wife laughed. Where will you go? You're nothing but a useless maid. Her cousins jeered. You'll die in the streets. But Binta did not respond. She picked up her small polythene bag, the only thing she owned, and walked toward the door. Her uncle glared at her. If you leave, don't ever come back. Binta turned back and met his eyes. I won't. Then she walked out of the house. She did not know where she was going. She only knew one thing. She was going to survive. And one day, she would return. Binta's life on the streets was not easy, but for the first time since she lost her parents, she felt free. No longer was she under the roof of those who sought to break her spirit. She had left behind the chains of her uncle's household and was finally taking her fate into her own hands. She had gone to find the boy who had saved her from starvation, the one who had hidden food for her in the cracks of a building. His name was Mike. He lived in an uncompleted building on the outskirts of town, and when she arrived, he did not hesitate to welcome her. For the first time in years, Binta felt safe. Mike was kind and understanding, treating her not as a burden but as a person who deserved care. They lived simply, surviving on what little they could earn from hawking. Every morning, they would each set out, selling goods on the streets, pushing through the scorching sun and the harsh glares of those who looked down on street vendors. But one day, fate took another cruel turn. It was an ordinary day when it happened. Binta had just picked up a bunch of bananas from her tray, ready to hand them to a customer. She barely noticed the sleek black car speeding towards her until it was too late. There was a loud, sickening thud. She was thrown off her feet, her body crashing onto the pavement. Pain exploded through her, sharp and unbearable. Her vision blurred, but for a brief moment, she caught a glimpse of the face behind the wheel. Her heart nearly stopped. It was her uncle's wife. Then everything faded into darkness. When Binta woke up, she was in a hospital bed, her body weak and covered in bandages. Mike sat by her side, his face filled with worry. Binta, you're awake, he breathed in relief. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry. Mike quickly handed her a cup of water. Drink. She took slow sips, wincing at the pain in her ribs. Why did this happen? She whispered. Mike's jaw clenched. It was a hit and run. The driver didn't stop. But you were lucky. Someone brought you here in time. Binta swallowed hard, the memory of the driver's face flashing before her eyes. It wasn't an accident. It was an attempt to kill her. She didn't tell Mike. She knew he would be furious, and there was nothing they could do without proof. Instead, she focused on getting better. But Mike had seen enough suffering. Binta, I don't want you to hawk anymore, he told her firmly one evening. It's too dangerous. She protested at first, not wanting to feel like a burden. But Mike was determined. Don't argue, he said gently. I'll take care of everything. I've saved up some money. We'll move out of this place and find something better. True to his word, when Binta recovered, they left the uncompleted building and moved into a public yard. The room was small, but it had a roof over their heads. It was theirs. People assumed they were siblings, and Binta did not correct them. It was easier that way. She stayed home, cleaning and cooking, while Mike worked harder than ever. He no longer sold bananas. Instead, he bought innerwear in bulk and pushed a wheelbarrow from one market to another, determined to build a future. One evening, as they sat outside, watching the sunset, he turned to her. One day, when I make it, he said softly, I'll marry you. Binta looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had nothing to give him except herself, and yet he never made her feel less. Life continued, and though they were still poor, they were happy. But everything changed the day the police arrived at Bonnie's house. Bonnie and his wife were in the garden when two officers, accompanied by a man in a suit, approached. "We are looking for Binta," one officer announced. Bonnie's wife scoffed. "What has she done now?" "When we see her, you will know," the officer replied. Bonnie folded his arms. "I don't know where she is. She's nothing but a criminal. Despite everything I did for her, she ran away with street boys." The man in the suit narrowed his eyes. "So, you don't know the whereabouts of your niece while you're comfortably living in her father's house?" Bonnie's expression darkened. "Watch your mouth, young man. Don't talk to me anyhow in my house. You'll find out soon enough who I am." As the argument continued, one of Bonnie's sons stepped forward. "I know where she lives," he said. "She stays in Axe Street with some guy." The officers did not hesitate. "Take us there." Bonnie and his wife had no choice but to follow. Binta was outside washing clothes when she saw them approaching. A knot formed in her stomach. The officers wasted no time. "Binta, you need to come with us." "What did I do?" she asked, her heart pounding. "When we get to the station, you'll find out." Bonnie's wife sneered. "So, this is where you chose to live? With a man who hasn't even paid your bride price?" The man in the suit shot her a warning glare, and she immediately fell silent. Binta went inside, quickly scribbled a note for Mike, and placed it on the table. Then she left with the officers. When Mike returned and found the room empty, his heart sank. But then he saw the note. "Come to the CPS. Some officers came with my uncle and asked me to follow them. Believe me, I didn't do anything." Without wasting another second, he rushed to the station. When he arrived, Binta looked just as confused as he was. "I don't know what's going on," she told him. Then the officer in charge stepped forward. They followed him outside, and suddenly, voices rose in song. "Happy birthday to you." Binta froze. Confused, she turned and saw a crowd gathered. Her uncle and his wife looked just as stunned. Then the man in the suit stepped forward and handed her a familiar-looking parcel. Her breath hitched. It was the same parcel her father had given her on her 8th birthday. The man smiled. "Happy 20th birthday, Binta. Your father left strict instructions that you could only open this on your 20th birthday. And today is that day." Binta's hands trembled. She had forgotten her own birthday. Slowly, she unwrapped the parcel. Inside was a document. The lawyer took it and began reading aloud. "All my properties are to go to my daughter, Binta, on her 20th birthday. If Bonnie takes good care of her, then 30% shall be his. But if he does not, then everything belongs to Binta." Bonnie let out a scream. "No, no." An officer stepped forward and delivered a thunderous slap across his face. Bonnie and his wife fell to their knees, begging Binta for mercy. But Binta remained calm. "The only kindness I will show you," she said, "is that I won't have you arrested for my parents' murder. But you will leave this house and never return." They were shocked. "You heard our conversation," Bonnie's wife whispered, horrified. "Yes, and now, I have nothing more to say to you." With that, she turned her back on them. Bonnie and his family were forced to flee to the village, where they lived in misery for the rest of their lives. Binta reclaimed her father's wealth, but she never forgot the one person who had stood by her. She and Mike went back to school, studied hard, and years later, they graduated from the same university. And true to his word, Mike married Binta. Together, they built a happy life, and God blessed their union with 3 beautiful children. Binta had finally found her way home.